Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about an inspector calls. So we are reading through Act 2 and we've got to this point here. So let's listen to the audio.
Where did you go?
To the county hotel, which I knew would be quiet at that time of night. All she wanted was to talk, a little friendliness.
She talked about herself?
Yes, she told me her name was Daisy Renton, that she'd lost both parents, that she came originally from somewhere outside Brumley. She also told me that she'd had a job in one of the works here and had had to leave after a strike. She said something about a shop too, but wouldn't say which it was. And she was deliberately vague about what happened. I couldn't get any exact details about her past life, but what she did let slip, though she didn't mean to, was that she was desperately hard up, and at that moment was actually hungry. I made the people at the county find her some food.
And then you decided to keep her as your mistress?
What?
Of course, Mother. It was obvious from the start.
I discovered she was going to be turned out of the miserable back room she had. A friend of mine had gone off to Canada for 6 months and given me the key to a set of rooms and asked me to keep an eye on them and use them if I wanted. So I insisted on Daisy moving into those rooms, and I made her take some money to keep her going there. I want you to understand, Inspector, that I didn't install her there so that I could make love to her. I made her go because I was sorry for her, and I didn't like the idea of her going back to the Palace Bar. I didn't ask for anything in return.
I see.
Yes, but why are you saying that to him? You ought to be saying it to me.
I suppose I ought, really. I'm sorry, Sheila. Somehow
I know. Somehow he makes you.
But she became your mistress?
I suppose it was inevitable. She was young and pretty and warm-hearted and intensely grateful. I became the most important person in her life.
Were you in love with her?
Oh, I really must protest.
Why should you protest? It was you who turned the girl out in the first place.
I only did what any employer might have done. And what I was going...
Okay, let's stop there and go back to where we were. So this is where we were. So this page we can kind of skip through, except you might want to just pause the video and just read through this. This is just summarizing what we already know. So she mentions the strike and the shop. Okay. So, yep, so we can skip through that page there. And then this page is very important. So notice here at this point, she's really, really desperate. And when it says actually hungry, so to get to the point where you don't have a penny to even buy food, that's a very extreme situation. And then this word mistress, we don't tend to use it nowadays, but basically it's somebody that you have, which is somebody different to the main person you're supposed to be with. Okay. And then this bit, you can just pause the video and read through this. He's just explaining the background, how his friend. So notice how these rich people, they can lend each other houses. They don't think twice about that kind of thing. And so he uses that room. And obviously that way he can keep it secret from Sheila. And notice how he's he really wants to make it clear that he's not directly giving money to Eva Smith. And this is why we have to be a bit careful about Eva Smith or kind of directly saying that she was selling herself as such. And Priestley does this deliberately because otherwise it would be too simple. Stories are not meant to be too simple, and characters mustn't be too simple. So the reader has to kind of work out what's going on and to think carefully about what's going on. And obviously, human beings are like that. They're not totally straightforward. They do change and have different motivations. Okay, so Gerald is a bit of a complex character, as all characters are usually in stories. Okay, so we can move to the next page now. So this page here, you can kind of read through yourselves if you want to pause the video. Previously just painting a picture of these characters interacting, and nothing is straightforward. Relationships are complicated. We all know that, and that's true as much nowadays as it was then, and probably will be to the end of time. Okay, let's move on to the next page. Actually, this is kind of where we left off. So let's just listen to more of the video.
I really must protest.
Why should you protest? It was you who turned the girl out in the first place.
I only did what any employer might have done. And what I was going to say was that I protest against the way in which my daughter, a young, unmarried girl, is being dragged
And
into
it was
this whole...
I who had the girl turned out of her job at Millwoods. And I'm supposed to be engaged to Gerald. I'm not a child, Father. I've a right to know. Well, Gerald, were you in love with her?
It's hard to say. I didn't feel about her as she felt about me.
Of course not. You were the wonderful fairy prince. You must have adored it.
All right, I did for a time. Nearly any man would have done.
That's probably about the best thing you've said tonight. At least it's honest. Did you go and see her every night?
No, I wasn't telling you a complete lie when I said I've been busy at the works. We were very busy. But of course I did see a good deal of her.
I don't think we want any further details of this disgusting affair.
I do.
It wasn't disgusting.
It's disgusting to me.
Yes, but after all, you didn't come into this, did you, Mother?
Inspector, is there anything else you want to know? That you ought to know?
Yes. When did this affair end?
I can tell you exactly. In the first week of September. I had to go away for several weeks on business. By that time, Daisy knew it was coming to an end. So I broke it off definitely before I went.
How did she take it?
Better than I'd hoped. She was very gallant about it.
That was nice for you.
No, it wasn't. She told me she'd been happier than ever before, but that she knew it couldn't last, hadn't expected it to last. She didn't blame me at all. I wish to God she had now. Perhaps I'd feel better about it.
She had to move out of those rooms.
Yes. She'd saved a little money during the summer. Didn't want to take any more from me. But I insisted on a parting gift of enough money to see her through to the end of the year.
Did she tell you what she proposed to do?
No, she refused to talk about that. I got the idea that she thought of leaving Brumley. Did she?
Yes. She went away to be alone, to be quiet, to remember all that had happened between you.
How do you know that?
She kept a rough sort of diary. She felt there'd never be anything as good again for her. And she said she had to go away and remember. Just to make it last longer.
I see. Well, I never saw her again. And that's all I can tell you.
It's all I want to know from you.
Okay, so this is where we left off. And Berlin tries to protest. And the inspector says, why should you protest? You were the one who turned her out in the first place. And this page we can kind of skim through, except, again, notice how they think that Sheila and Eva Smith should be treated differently. That Sheila is kind of middle and or middle class, upper class, and she should be treated delicately. But Eva Smith, it doesn't matter how she's treated. I mean, here, all that's happening to Sheila is that she's having to hear these things. Eva Smith had to live through them. Yeah. So the difference between how these two girls are treated by the people around them. And actually, strangely enough, Sheila kind of understands that. I mean, the inspector says this. Some of these lines are missed out in the audio version, but Sheila does actually understand this. Okay, so let's move on to the next page. And then this, you can just pause the video and read through this yourselves. This is just giving the background of the story, just telling the plot. Okay, so don't need to analyze this page too much. So this page is quite important because in the sense that the way Gerald talks about how they ended the relationship and how he ended things, I broke it off definitely before I went. I mean, to him, it's nothing. He's not going to think twice about it after this. We know that. And then this word here, gallant, normally is applied to men. It means like brave and heroic, but it can also mean courteous, polite. So he's probably using it in that sense. Although she is being brave, because we know she's going to be turned out of this house. She has nowhere to go. She's got a little bit of money, as we'll see here, but nevertheless, she is going to be brave because she's got nowhere to go, no job, just a little bit of money. That's not going to last very long. And then, yeah, he pretends to be sorry, but basically we know he wasn't really. The moment they broke up, he forgot all about her. And this agreement about moving out, and he says, yes, we'd agreed about that. She'd saved a little bit of money. I insisted on a parting gift, which to him would have been nothing. So, yeah, there's that page there to think about. And then this is just a background story. This is fairly important, this thing about a diary, because why do you think Priestley introduces this idea, or not introduced, because he kind of mentioned it before? It's really just a plot device, because otherwise we would need to know how the inspector knows all of this stuff. Of course, there's the hint at the end that he's supernatural, so he may know in that manner. But by having this diary, that makes the audience one think about that. It's not so obvious whether he's supernatural or whether he just knows everything he knows from the diary. So again, notice that a writer will never make things too simple. They want to make the reader, or the audience in this case, because it's a play, to think. Okay, the story mustn't be too simple, too obvious. Okay, so this is where we left off actually. So let's listen to a bit more audio.
In that case, well, I'd like to be alone for a little while. I'd be glad if you let me go.
Go where? Home?
No, I'll just go out, walk about for a while, if you don't mind. I'll come back.
All right, Mr. Croft.
Just in case you don't come back, Gerald, I think you'd better take your ring with you.
I see. Well, I was expecting this.
I don't dislike you as I did half an hour ago, Gerald. In fact, in some odd way, I rather respect you more than I've ever done before. I knew anyhow you were lying about those months last year when you hardly came near me. And now at least you've been honest. And I believe what you told us about the way you helped her at first just out of pity. And it was my fault, really, that she was so desperate when you first met her. But this has made a difference. You and I aren't the same people who sat down to dinner here. We'd have to start all over again, getting to know each other.
Now, Sheila, I'm not defending him, but you must understand that a lot of young men...
Don't interfere, please, Father. Gerald knows what I mean.
Yes, I know what you mean. But I'm coming back, if I may.
All right.
Thank you.
You know, Inspector, you never showed him that photograph of her.
It wasn't necessary.
You have a photograph of this girl?
Yes. I think you'd better take a look at it. You recognize her?
No,
Oh, I can't believe she could have changed so much.
I don't understand.
Actually, let's just stop there. I know that was brief, but he's now carrying on. The inspector's now moving on to the next character, Mrs. Burling. So let's just go back to where we were. So I think this is where we were. So we talked about the diary. So let's talk about this page. And this is important in terms of the plot and so on. So this is an important point that she hands him back the ring, and she talks about how, in a way, she respects him a bit more now because he's at least telling the truth. And we can see here that she knew back then that there was something fishy going on. So this means something dodgy, suspicious. And at least now he's being honest. So it begs the question why she didn't say anything at the time. So that could be to do with gender roles. It could be to do with the difference in class. And then this line is important because notice how Berling tries to defend Gerald, even though he says he's not defending him. He takes his son-in-law's side rather than his own daughter's side, which nowadays I think most people would agree would be the opposite. And then here, this line is skipped in the audio, but Mrs. Berling is hoping that it's all over, but it's not yet. And notice this whole thing about the photograph. So that will become clear later on towards the end as to why he doesn't show them the photograph. Okay, so this is where we left off. Let's listen to a bit more of the audio.
It wasn't necessary.
You have a photograph of this girl?
Yes. I think you'd better take a look at it. You recognize her?
No,
Oh, I can't believe she could have changed so much.
I don't understand you.
You're not telling me the truth.
I beg your pardon.
Look here, Inspector, I'm not going to have this. You'll apologise at once.
For doing my duty.
For being so offensive about it. I'm a public man.
Public men, Mr. Burling, have responsibilities as well as privileges.
Possibly, but you weren't asked to come here to talk to me about my responsibilities.
Let's hope not, though I'm beginning to wonder.
Does that mean anything, Sheila?
It means that we've no excuse now for putting on airs, and that if we've any sense we won't try. Father threw this girl out because she asked for decent wages. I pushed her further out, right into the street, just because she was pretty. Gerald set her up as his mistress and then dropped her when it suited him, and now you're pretending you don't recognise her from that photograph. And if you're not telling the truth, why should the inspector apologise? Can't you see, Mother, you're making it worse?
Oh, it was the door again.
Gerald must have come back.
Unless your son has just gone out.
I'll see.
Mrs. Burling, you're a prominent member of the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation.
Go on, Mother. You might as well admit it. Yes, she is. Why?
It's an organisation to which women in distress can appeal for help. Isn't that so?
We've done a great deal of useful work in helping deserving cases.
You were in the chair of the interviewing committee 2 weeks ago, were you not?
And if I was, what business is it of yours?
Mrs. Burling.
It must have been Eric we heard go out.
Eric? Where can he have gone to?
Can't imagine. But he was in one of his excitable, queer moods, and even though we don't need him here...
We do need him here, and if he's not back soon, I shall have to go and find him.
Why?
I'll explain that when you've answered my questions.
Is there any reason why my wife should answer questions from you, Inspector?
Yes, a very good reason. You remember that Mr. Croft told us that he hadn't spoken to or seen Eva Smith since last September. But Mrs. Burling spoke to and saw her only 2 weeks ago.
Mother!
Is this true?
Okay, so that's a good point to pause on that dramatic moment. So let's just go back. So this is where we left off. Or rather, this is the bit of the audio that we listened to. So this is fairly straightforward. You can pause the video and just read through these lines again. He shows Mrs. Burling the photo, and she says that she doesn't recognize her. So this page here, we can kind of skip these lines, but these lines are important where he says, I'm a public man. So again, always bigging himself up, always trying to intimidate the inspector, but the inspector comes back just as strongly that public men have responsibilities as well as privileges. And so we can move to the next slide. And then here we can kind of skip through this slide as well. You might want to pause the video and just read through these lines again. This is just Sheila summarizing, or rather Priestley using Sheila to summarize for the audience what's happened so far. Okay. So good writers find a way of doing that, of reminding the reader or the audience in this case what's happened so far, but without doing it too kind of obviously. Okay, so making it still part of the plot and the story, making the characters do it in some way. And then we hear the slamming of the door, and you can read those lines there. And then these lines here. So Mrs. Burling, she's a member of this organization, which is supposed to help women, but we're going to find out that she actually doesn't help. And quite often, these kind of people, they become members of organizations really just to make themselves look good and not necessarily to actually do good. Okay, so that's that page there. Notice here that she's very reluctant to answer his questions. She doesn't even talk here. And then here she doesn't really answer properly. And here she's being quite rude. So you can pause the video and read through these lines again if you want to. And Mr. Burley comes in and Eric apparently has gone out. So yeah, you can just pause the video here and just read these lines if you need to. And then we stopped here. So apparently Mrs. Burling spoke to Eva Smith and saw her just 2 weeks ago. Okay, so let's just listen to a bit more of the audio.
Yes, quite true.
She appealed to your organisation for help?
Yes.
Not as Eva Smith.
No, nor as Daisy Renton.
As what, then?
First, she called herself Mrs. Burling.
Mrs. Burling?
It was gross impertinence. Naturally, that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case.
I should think so. Damned impudence.
You admit to being prejudiced against her case.
Yes.
And was it owing to your influence as the most prominent member of the committee that help was refused the girl?
Yes. I didn't like her manner. She'd impertinently made use of our name, though she pretended afterwards it just happened to be the first she thought of. She had to admit, after I began questioning her, that the story she told at first about a husband who deserted her was quite false.
Why did she want help?
You know very well why.
No, I don't. I know why she needed help. But as I wasn't there, I don't know what she asked from your committee.
I don't think we need to discuss it.
Mrs. Burling.
If you think you can bring any pressure to bear upon me, Inspector, you're quite mistaken. Unlike the other three, I did nothing I'm ashamed of or that won't bear investigation. The girl made a claim for assistance. I wasn't satisfied with it. She seemed to me to be not a good case, and so I used my influence to have it refused. And in spite of what's happened to the girl since, I consider I did my duty. So, if I prefer not to discuss it any further, you have no power to make me change my mind.
Yes, I have.
No, you haven't. Simply because...
Okay, let's just stop there and go back to where we were. So we can move to this slide here. So the important point here is that Eva Smith presents herself as Mrs. Burling. We're going to find out later that's because she's pregnant with Eric's child. So in a way she is Mrs. Burling, but not obviously married. And obviously the real Mrs. Burling isn't happy about this. So gross means big or huge. Rude impertinence means rudeness. And she admits that that made her prejudiced against her. Impudence means rudeness again. And then this page is quite important. So she admits being prejudiced. This line is skipped in the audio, but notice that line there. And she admits influencing the committee. And then these lines are really important. So even though she knows that Eva Smith has died this horrible death, she's still talking badly about her, didn't like her manner, impertinent, meaning rude, pretending to use their name, and then saying how she lied with her story, although we know that she wasn't totally telling the truth in the sense that, yes, they weren't married, but she had a baby, she was pregnant from Eric. But here we can see that Mrs. Burling is a little bit ashamed because she's not admitting that Eva Smith asked for help because she was pregnant. So she just kind of skips all through that and just says, "Oh, I looked at the case and I wasn't convinced that she deserved it." Okay, so we can skip to the next slide. Okay, so we'll stop there because this is quite an important slide. We're going to find out about the pregnancy. So we haven't actually learnt that yet officially. I've obviously done a bit of a spoiler alert and told you about it. Okay, so I'm going to skip to the last slide. And as always, if you found that video useful, please do tell your friends and do subscribe. And in the next video, we are going to finish off Act 2.